One of the most popular formats for podcasts is the interview format or interview shows. Heck, my podcast, How I Built It, is primarily an interview show. There are a few things that I want to talk to you about when it comes specifically to interview shows because they can be a lot of work. Uh, First of all, finding your guests can be a grind because you have a mission, you have a set of topics that you want to talk about, and now you need to find somebody who can speak intelligently about those things. So, first, don't just take anybody who comes across your desk. I know it could be really tempting because it's easy. You have these places like Interview Valet who are just sending guests to you with a one sheet and questions you can ask, but you need to remember your mission and why you created the show. Remember that those places are getting paid to kind of make sure their guests get on a certain number of shows per month. When I get those emails, I always ask the person, what about my show specifically did you like? And why do you think your guest would be good for my target audience? And if they can't tell me my target audience, which is small business owners, and if they can't tell me in more than just I really like your interview style. If they can't say more than that, then I'm probably going to put them um in the trash bin because they are not going to add value to my show. Make sure to vet anybody who you do decide to have on your show. I respond to all of those emails because I do want good guests for my audience. What I don't want is people who are just looking to promote themselves. I have sponsors who pay for the privilege of promoting their work. And again, I don't want content that won't add value to my audience. A quick story here is I got um I got an interview request for somebody who wanted to be on my show, and they basically explicitly said they wanted to be on the show to promote an event of theirs. And after some back and forth, I said, "Look, if you want to promote your event, um, then you have to sponsor the show." I still thought they'd be a good guest because of who they were and their background and things like that. And so, as we were walking through kind of the negotiation for when we would do the interview, they said, "By the way, this interview needs to air by this date so we can promote the show." And that was a deal breaker. I was like, "You can't come on the show anymore because, again, if you want to promote your thing on my show on a specific date, you need to pay for that. I don't want somebody who's coming on my podcast and just talking about themselves. I want somebody coming on my podcast and giving my audience good advice." So make sure to vet anybody who you decide comes on your show. And then design an interview around that guest. So ask them questions that they'll be teed up to answer. Make sure to extract the tips that you want to extract from your guest because these things will add value to your listeners. Next up, and this is why having guests can be so hard, is scheduling. You have to do the calendar dance. You need to figure out what time works best for you if you're in different time zones and things like that. So there are a few tools that I recommend. They are in the course resources below this video. But I use a Zapier automation with Calendly. Calendly is my favorite tool for this because it integrates with Google Calendar. It allows people to check their calendars and it figures out all the time zone stuff. You can also say when you are available to record, and that's my second tip. Make sure to set specific times that you want to record. I used to do this thing where I would just record whenever my guest could because I wanted to be as accommodating as possible. But that wrecked my work days. So I make all of Thursday available to record from the morning to when I'm ready to knock off. And I have a Calendly that has those times open. So I will be flexible if I need to, especially if I invite somebody onto the show. But for the most part, I record on Thursdays. If you're going to set time aside, which I strongly recommend you do, make sure to space out your interviews in your calendar. Don't just have them one on top of the other because you want to mentally reset. you want to prep, you want to review your notes for the next interview, I space mine 15 minutes apart. And Calendly allows you to do that too. So you can say, don't allow 2 interviews within 15 minutes of each other. And then have a limit. 4 is my limit. If I do more than 4 interviews a day, I am fried, and the last interview is not going to be good. And I want to be at the top of my game for all of them. So Calendly allows you to add that limit as well. And finally, guard your time, like I said, but be flexible. One more story here is somebody wanted to come on my show. I thought they would be a good guest. We were having trouble because of the time zones. We were basically like over 12, I think about 12 hours time difference. And they basically said, why don't you record at 8 p.m. at night? And I said, no, I am out of the office at that point. And they said, what about 7 a.m. In your morning? And I said, no, you have my calendar. These are the times that work for me. If you're going to invite yourself on my show, I need to guard my time, because that time outside of when I'm working is my family time. So we couldn't come to an agreement. But on the other hand, if I invite somebody, I invited Troy Dean onto my show. I wanted to have him specifically on my podcast. And then I worked with him, right? Because now I'm making the request. I'm the one who should be accommodating. And I planned that into my schedule. But if somebody's going to come on your podcast for your platform, then they should try to work within your schedule if possible. So just a little bit of advice there. Guard your time, because it could wreck your workday. You have other things that you might need to do. So vet your guests, research. How much research is enough research? You need to decide that. Some people do no research. They just have the guest on and they have a conversation about whatever. And some know every little thing about their guests, from like the day they were born to what they ate for lunch that same day they're doing the recording. But what you should do is figure out how much you want to know about your guest to make a good interview. Again, I do some research about my guest to understand what they do, what their product is, and what advice they can offer my audience. But I like to be surprised on the microphone. I like to be surprised and learn things with my guests. So I don't do so much research that I'm going to know the answer to every question I ask. So do your own research, create a list of relevant questions for your guest. And then don't force the conversation. Knowing so much information means that you could probably choreograph the entire interview. And you want the conversation to sound natural. So don't just like run through a list of questions like you're at the DMV or something. Make sure that your interview sounds natural. This is why I like to be surprised, because people can hear that in my voice, that I'm not asking a question I already know the answer to. At the very least, you need to get your guest's name and title correct. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But make sure you're both kind of prepared for the conversation you're about to have. Have a short conversation before you record so you know expectations. I try to send my guests the questions I'm going to ask ahead of time. I actually send them like a one sheet with everything that they need to know. We'll talk more about that later too. But make sure your guests are as prepared as possible. And have a checklist. Make sure to run through everything every time to make sure you're using the right microphone, you're capturing your audio and your guest's audio, make sure you have your facts straight, and all sorts of things that you don't want to forget, because trust me, I haven't used a checklist in the past, and I used like the built-in microphone instead of my good microphone. And so that interview, I had to do a lot of work to get that interview up to the standard I wanted it to be. Luckily for you, in the workbook, there are 2 checklists. There's one for a solo show and there's one for an interview show. So be sure to check that out. Use that as a basis for your own checklist. And my last piece of advice here is mix it up. Doing interview after interview can sometimes be monotonous. So throw in a solo show once in a while. And just talk about things that you've learned. I like to wrap up all of my seasons with a bonus episode of what I learned over the past season, and bring up some of the lessons that I learned over the past 6 months. I even had a friend come on my show. His name is Jeff Large. He's awesome. he came on my show and interviewed me about how I built my podcast. And to date, that is still one of the most downloaded episodes. So your action item for this lesson is, if you want to do an interview show, make a list of 20 people that you think will be good to interview for your podcast and write down the topics or the subjects you want to talk to them about. Then reach out. Okay, so that's it for this section for preparing your podcast. Let's get into one of my favorite topics, which is gear.